Today, let's talk about one of the most incredible figures in history, a woman whose story just feels like it's made for Hollywood. We're diving into the life of Shajar al-Durr, the slave who clawed her way up to become the Sultan of Egypt.
But here's the thing. Her story ends with this shocking line, recorded by medieval historians. I mean, just let that sink in. It's a brutal, horrific end for anyone, let alone a monarch.
So that's the big question, right? How does the ruler of Egypt end up like that? Well, to understand her fall, we first have to unpack the unbelievable story of her rise to power. And this story doesn't start in a palace, not even close. It starts in a slave market. Her journey from complete obscurity to the very heart of the empire, it is truly something else.
So, Shajar al-Durr, whose name actually means Tree of Pearls, began her life enslaved. She was purchased by the man who would become Sultan, Ayyubid, but her intelligence and, well, her beauty made her stand out immediately. She became his concubine, and after she gave him a son, he did something almost unheard of at the time. He freed her and officially made her his wife.
Okay, this is the moment where everything changes. Egypt is facing a massive threat from the outside, and right when the crisis hits its peak, the whole country is suddenly plunged into a terrifying secret.
So picture this, it's 1249. King Louis IX of France decides to launch the Seventh Crusade, and he lands a massive army right on Egyptian soil. The Sultan, Ayyubid, is already incredibly sick, and then, at the absolute worst possible moment, with an enemy army marching on the capital, the Sultan dies.
Think about that. Egypt was completely leaderless, totally vulnerable. The army could have panicked, the state could have just collapsed. But it didn't. Why? Because Shajar al-Durr made the incredibly bold decision to step up and seize control herself.
And what she did next was it was pure genius. First, she hid the Sultan's death, telling only 2 people she could trust. She got a servant to forge his signature so she could issue official decrees and run the war from behind the scenes. She even had meals brought to his empty tent every day to keep up the illusion that he was just sick. And this was the masterstroke. She made the entire army swear an oath of loyalty, not just to the sick sultan, but to his son and heir, who wasn't even there yet. And get this, it worked. It worked flawlessly. Under her secret command, the Egyptian army rallied. They were led by the Mamluks. Now, these weren't just soldiers. They were an elite class of slave warriors who were the real power in the military. They absolutely crushed the Crusaders and even managed to capture the King of France himself. It was an unbelievable victory, and it was all orchestrated by a woman whose power was a total secret.
So with the war won and the country saved, the secret could finally come out. But this just created a brand new power vacuum, one that Shajar al-Durr was more than ready to fill.
The Sultan's heir, Turan Shah, finally arrives. And you'd think he'd be grateful, right? To Shajar al-Durr and the Mamluks who literally saved his kingdom? Nope. He was arrogant, he was demanding, and he started threatening them all. Well, that didn't last long. Within a few months, the Mamluks had had enough, and they assassinated him.
So with the last heir of that dynasty dead, the Mamluks made a revolutionary move. They had no loyalty to old bloodlines. They only cared about competence and strength. So they turned to the one person who had proven she could lead, the architect of their victory. They named Shajar al-Durr the new monarch of Egypt. I mean, this was unthinkable. A former slave was now on the throne, put there by other former slaves?
And check this out, because this detail is so important. When her coins were minted, she wasn't called Sultana, which would be the female version. No, she was named Sultan. She claimed the full, undiluted, masculine title of absolute power.
So she had saved the country, she'd won a war, the army loved her, but for the rest of the world, a female sultan was just impossible to accept.
Just listen to this. This was the message sent from the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, who was kind of the spiritual head of the Islamic world. His refusal to recognize her was a huge blow to her legitimacy. It was this deeply misogynistic insult that basically questioned the manhood of the entire country. So how long did she manage to rule alone? Just 80 days, that's it. The pressure from the outside and from rivals inside Egypt just became too much to handle.
So she had to make a compromise, a really tough one. To save the Mamluk state that she had basically founded, she had to give up her own absolute power. She abdicated and married the Mamluk commander Aybak, making him the sultan. She would still have power, but she'd have to rule through her husband. Right. So this marriage of convenience, well, it was a ticking time bomb. And this final, vicious power struggle is what brings us right back to that violent scene at the very beginning of our story.
For about 7 years, they ruled together, but it was always tense. The breaking point came when Aybak decided to take a second wife for a political alliance. Shajar al-Durr saw this as the ultimate betrayal, so she struck first. She had him murdered. But his Mamluks figured it out fast. They arrested her, and then they handed her over to Aybak's first wife for revenge. And her servants stripped Shajar al-Durr and beat her to death with wooden clogs.
And if that wasn't wild enough, there's this really bizarre, grim legend tied to her death. The story goes that to celebrate, Aybak's first wife had a brand new dessert created, this rich, sweet bread pudding. That dish is still one of Egypt's most famous desserts today. It's called Ali. So here we have it. On one side, the coin from her 80-day reign as Sultan, a symbol of her raw ambition. And on the other, her incredible tomb in Cairo, a symbol of her lasting impact. So how do you square these two things? Well, her personal rule was short, but her legacy, it's monumental. She didn't just win a battle, she basically ended the whole Crusader dream of conquering that part of the world. She didn't just get rid of an heir, she ended an entire dynasty. And most importantly, she founded the Mamluk dynasty, which would rule Egypt for more than 250 years. And on top of all that, she was a huge patron of architecture, creating styles that would define Cairo for centuries.
And she left one last super clever mark on history. Inside her own tomb, there's a mosaic in the prayer niche. And what does it show? A tree with pearl-like fruit. A literal tree of pearls. Shajar al-Durr. She made sure that even in death, nobody would forget her name.
So in the end, yeah, her time as the Supreme Sultan was just a flash, less than 3 months. But the forces she unleashed and the dynasty she established, that would define the Middle East for generations to come. A truly remarkable legacy for the slave who became Sultan.